Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my reaction video to yesterday's win against the Indianapolis Colts. It wasn't a pretty win, but a win is a win. And at this point of the season, we're not worried about style points. All you want to do is sort of get as many wins as you can early in the season. Hopefully when we get some of our skill position players back as the season goes on, then hopefully we can get things together more and really start looking more like the unit that we're used to seeing and be a little more explosive on offense. But given the fact of the weapons we had yesterday and the way the weather was yesterday, that's perfectly acceptable as far as I'm concerned with the win that we came away with. And Carson Wentz looked good. Good enough, I guess I should say. Certainly wasn't phenomenal in his play. The first drive looked great, but after that, he made some mistakes that I think he'd probably rather have back and would rather have not done. The interception, I think, was a bad interception. I can't put him on my studs list because of some of the mistakes he made. If we would have lost this game, he probably would have been at the top or near the top of my duds list because of those two turnovers. Those two turnovers led to 6 points, and if Indianapolis scores at the end there, we lose this thing 23-20. You take those 6 points off, and that's the difference of the game. So obviously, all of that is real important to where we end up finishing in this thing, and the fact that those turnovers really sort of put our defense in a bind, which they then bailed Carson Wentz out of. But all in all, I got to say that his performance, I think, was good enough. It was nice to be able to see that he was mobile and moving around. I think some of the issues that he did have is just probably some rust that he's got to just work through. Really, this was his first preseason game, if you want to look at it that way. And, I really sort of give him a little bit of time to sort of work some of that out. Hopefully next week he can get rid of the rest of it, because in 2 weeks when we play against the Vikings, we're going to need him at the top of his game. Let's go ahead though and take a look at some studs and duds since we won this week. Obviously I'll start with the bad first, and with the duds. There's a couple guys that I'm going to sort of signal out that either were invisible to me, which is a problem, or stood out as having some issues. And my number 3 dud of the week is going to be a guy who I just don't remember hearing his name yesterday, and that's Brandon Graham. And that's a problem because you need him when you're going up against the offensive line like the Colts and you've got Andrew Luck. You need to have someone there who's getting pressure on the quarterback. And Brandon Graham just was not getting any sort of pressure. The defensive line, except for one guy I'll talk about in a moment, the defensive line as a whole really, I think, struggled to get any sort of consistent pressure on Luck. And that was a problem. And Brandon Graham, he's the guy that's supposed to be getting that pressure, and it just wasn't coming from him. My number 2 dud of the week is going to be Lane Johnson. And that, a couple different things. I think he was overmatched. Playing up against, I forget the guy's name, the big guy from Estonia that he was going up against. But he really sort of struggled going up against him all day. And it ended up becoming a problem because then ultimately it leads to the strip sack, because Lane Johnson sort of gets pushed back, and then he's able to, his defender he's guarding is able to reach out and knock the ball out of Carson Wentz's hands when Carson's getting ready to go step up in the pocket and make a play. That's problematic. The other thing that he did that no one's really talked about, that I didn't hear about, that sort of drove me nuts early in the game, was he was downfield making a block, and he ends up running into, I think it was Smallwood, who was running downfield, and ends up sort of breaking up his momentum, and that's a problem. As an offensive lineman, you sort of have to be aware of where the running back is that you're blocking for, so that doesn't happen. The worst thing you want to have happen is, in the process of running into him, he fumbles the ball. Now, that didn't happen in this case, but it certainly knocked him off his momentum, and he ends up getting tackled as a result. So it sort of took a play that could have been even bigger and ended up being a nice run, but Lane Johnson sort of ended up putting a dud on the end of it by sort of knocking his guy off, and he lost his balance and was able to be tackled relatively easily then. My number 1 dud of the week, though, is going to be, and this is going to be not just for this game, but for a lot of games in the NFL, and that's the referees. And I don't give referees duds when the Eagles lose because I don't want people to think I'm blaming refs for losses. So since the Eagles won this game, I'm putting the referees at the top of the duds list for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was far too many flags in that game. I think they got things wrong on both sides, so it wasn't a situation where I think it favored the Colts, and therefore, as a result, the game was closer for us than it needed to be. That wasn't the case. I think that, like I said, personally, I think the one where they got the late hit on the Colts against Wentz, I think that was a marginal call at best that we got the benefit of. Then later on, the pass interference calls, the first one on Jalen Mills, I understood why they called it. I think it was ticky-tack, but I understand why they call it. Whenever you're going to get your arm on the guy's shoulder like that, that back judge is going to see that, and that's what he's going to throw the flag on. But for the most part, the receiver's sort of adjusting to an underthrown ball, and Mills sort of runs into him as a result. And that's really not fair to the defender. The second PI call, though, I think was terrible, though. In that instance, Mills is behind the receiver, so the underthrown ball isn't a problem for him. Mills is stopping to sort of make a play on the ball, and the receiver is the one that initiates the contact with him. When they first threw the flag, I thought, honestly, they were going to call offensive pass interference. When they called defensive pass interference, I went absolutely nuts because I don't see how you can call that defensive pass interference when, if anything, the wide receiver is the one that initiates the contact more than Jalen Mills. Jalen Mills has the right to that position to go after that ball just as much as the receiver does, and the fact that that ends up getting called drove me nuts and is a play that I just don't understand how they end up calling something like that. If I prefer, actually, if there would have been no call on the play, because I think it's both guys going after the ball trying to get there. But the fact that they called that, if they're going to call it either way, it should have gone against the receiver, not the defender. So I think that was a terrible call on the part of that ends up being the PI against Jalen Mills. The other problem with referees is there was so many times where it just took too long for them to make their mind up in terms of what they were doing. In some instances, it was very clear what would have happened, and they've got to ask the coach, do you want to decline the penalty when clearly the gain that we got was better than what the penalty was? There was at least one occasion I could think of where that happened, where it's like, duh, of course you're going to decline the penalty. So it was stuff like that that drove me nuts. And of course, some of the other stuff that happened throughout the league with some of the penalties, some of it's inconsistent as well. The Matthews penalty in the Washington Green Bay game is just, that's the prototypical one in terms of he's getting flagged for sacking the quarterback. And I know they're talking about, putting the weight on the quarterback and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know what a defender's supposed to do there when he's going at the quarterback and he ends up hitting the quarterback and initiating the contact. It just makes I don't know what else he's supposed to do. But then on the flip side of it is I'm watching the later game between Dallas and Seattle, and there was a play where the Seattle defender just threw Dak Prescott like a rag doll, and I would have thought that's going to get penalized, because if someone's going to get hurt, you're thinking that's where they're going to get hurt. But that didn't get flagged at all. So is that what they're encouraging defenders to do? Because I think that's going to lead to more injuries than what happened with the Matthews sack on Alex Smith. So I just think the league's got to get this figured out. And until then, the referees are going to look terrible making some of the calls that they're making, because it's just brutal. And I think it's really going to sort of disrupt the flow of the game, where every time there's a big play, people are like looking for a flag before they really celebrate. That's a problem that the league has. But let's put all that aside, because that's a whole nother issue. I could probably do a whole video about some of the league rules and some of the problems that's been causing. Let's, though, look at the good from this game, because there were some studs in this game that I think really performed well that need to be recognized. And I'm going to go ahead and recognize 5 guys that I really think had exemplary games. Number 5, I'm going to go with coaching. When you have a defense that goes and holds a team to 1 out of 5 red zone trips, 1 out of 5 times that they get a touchdown, that's a real tribute to the defense, and that's a tribute to Jim Schwartz and the way he designed the defense in the red zone. We've seen it time and time again where teams get down there and then we're able to shut them down. Really, when you think about it, the game we lost this year, we lost because of big plays. It wasn't because teams were beating us in the red zone. When teams get in the red zone against us, they usually have a hard time putting it in, and that's a tribute to Jim Schwartz and the way he calls his defenses. My number 4 stud, I'm going to continue with the coaching, and I'm going to put Doug Peterson on there. we criticize him lots of times for some of the things he does, but he also has been proven to be a pretty good schemer in terms of the way he approaches games and really sort of attacks other teams. And in this game specifically, understanding what they were dealing with yesterday, you've got a quarterback who's fresh, who hasn't played much lately, so it's going to be hard to ask him to do a lot, but you've also got weather conditions that aren't favorable. And that 11-minute drive, 11-minute drive that happened in the fourth quarter, I think really it's got Doug's fingerprints all over it for the way he called that. It was reminiscent to me to the last year against the Chargers, where we had a drive that just ate up a ton of time and ended up running out the clock. And I think that was sort of the way that drive was designed. It had a couple really important third down conversions in it. And the other thing that I saw Doug do yesterday that I was wishing he would have done in the Tampa game that I criticized him for is when we got into a long situation, I think it was like a 2nd and 20 at one point, he calls for a longer pass and it ends up getting a penalty that gets the first down. And I think that those types of things, if you can do that, it keeps the sticks moving. And, let's test the defense in those situations, not just to stop you from getting the first down, but make them play disciplined football. And when you've got officials like this week and last week that are throwing a lot of flags, I think it makes sense to try and run some patterns that are going to encourage maybe a defender to do something he's not supposed to, and as a result, draw the flag and get the first down. And that's exactly what happened for Doug Peterson yesterday. So hats off to him for recognizing the situation and trying to take advantage of some of those things. And then, like I said, that 11-minute drive was really just something that was really great to see that the team still has that, and they're able to do that because it's going to really help us put away games at the end when we really need to. Moving on, though, in terms of studs for the week, and you got to give some props to the rookie who comes out with his first career touchdown reception. Dallas Goedert, I think, really ends up, he played a really good game after being basically invisible against Tampa. He really, I think, shows up, has a good game. They get him involved early, which I think was important. And he ends up leading the team in receptions, and also I think he was tied with Ertz for the yardage for 73 yards. So 7 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. Those are phenomenal numbers for a guy who's playing his first game with Carson Wentz. And I think Carson recognized that. And, one of the things that on the touchdown pass that I noticed is the safety clearly was cheating towards the side of the field where Zach Ertz was, and Dallas Goedert makes him pay by getting into the open part of the zone, and Wentz hits him for the easy touchdown. And that's stuff that, number one, it's good scheming for the coaching. It also, though, takes the receiver recognizing exactly where to go and run the route, and also obviously takes some recognition for the quarterback. So everybody really gets kudos for that. But Dallas Goedert obviously gets the benefit of getting his first career touchdown against in that situation in his third game from our franchise quarterback. So hats off to Dallas Goedert, my number 3 stud of the week. For my number 2 stud of the week, I'm going to give it to a guy who I never thought I'd give this much praise to, and that's Wendell Smallwood. And if there was a running back that I would have expected that would make my studs of the week list, he would have been pretty far down the list. I don't think I would have expected him to make it. I would have expected, Corey Clement to make it. But lo and behold, Wendell Smallwood had a really good game yesterday. He ran hard. There was some plays where he just kept, even though guys had made contact, he kept churning his feet and moving. And he ends up in a lot of those situations where he's in a lot of traffic. The most important thing as a running back is he secures the ball, and he doesn't turn the ball over. So, from that perspective, he had some issues before with fumbling. There was no signs of those issues yesterday. And for that reason, you really have to applaud him for taking advantage of the opportunity he had. Those aren't opportunities that are going to come around for him very often, because you've got, Darren Sproles and Jay Ajayi, who are clearly ahead of him on the depth chart. So he's pretty far down there. He has an opportunity yesterday. He makes the most of it, has a good game, 10 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. That's a great average, first of all, and obviously he puts in the game-winning touchdown at the end. So really, all-around great game for Wendell Smallwood, and he's my number 2 stud of the week. My number one stud of the week, though, is going to be the guy I've liked since we drafted him, the guy I wanted them to draft back when he was due up for it, and that was Derek Barnett. I criticized him after the Atlanta game for really making some brainless plays. He was all over the field yesterday. He was the one guy on that defensive line who was really making things happen. Fletcher Cox does his thing in his way as well, so he had a decent game. But Derek Barnett was the one that was really making the plays. He has 3 tackles for loss. He has 1.5 sacks, and obviously he has the big sack at the end of the game to seal it, where he gets luck on 4th down. So, all in all, great game from Derek Barnett, and I think you're really starting to see that now he's past his rookie year, more's expected of him, and I think maybe in that first game he was just a little too amped up, and now maybe he's, recognizing, hey, just let the sort of the plays come to me, and, he had a great game. Next week, he's going to be going down to Tennessee in his old home stomping grounds. So hopefully he's going to be able to get some of that mojo going down there as well, because he played a great game yesterday, was all over the field in run coverage as well. So all in all, I think Derek Barnett really had a solid game from beginning to end. And, if there's one guy on the defense that I think really deserves to get signaled out for his exemplary play, it was Derek Barnett. So great job there, and thanks again, Sam Bradford, for that draft pick. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Who are your studs and duds? Were there guys that you thought did a good job that I didn't mention? Were there guys that you thought made mistakes that I didn't criticize? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Obviously, I'm going to go ahead and check in on this coming weekend for the game against the Tennessee Titans. And we'll see exactly where we continue to go. And hopefully we'll continue to keep piling on those wins early in the season. And hopefully maybe we'll get a couple more guys back and get more healthy and get Carson Wentz some more weapons so that he'll have more guys around him to make better, which he seems to do every week. So like I said, I'll check in then. Until then, fly Eagles fly.